Hey, this is Sorry for Rambling with Alex Kack, and I'm really excited for our guest today. We have Finn McKenty from the Punk Rock MBA. Finn, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I don't think I asked. What part of the country are you in?
I'm in Arizona.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, like, just to jump right in, the Punk Rock MBA, you had a blog before that, correct?
Yes, it started as a blog in I think 2015, but I didn't really do much with it for the first few years. I just kind of squeezed it in when I had time, and I don't know. I just kind of eventually realized that blogging was not where the action is, and I said, well, if I want to take this seriously and build any kind of audience, then I guess I should be on YouTube.
Yeah, and you've built like a really, really impressive audience really quick. What did it take to do that? I mean, did people come to you, or did you have to go out and find them?
Well, the reason why I chose YouTube is because it has solved the discovery problem that's so hard for things like podcasts and blogs and pretty much everything else. Like you can, I mean, especially podcasts, I think you can put this thing out into the world, but how is anybody going to find it? That's starting to change a little bit with podcasts because Spotify, is getting into the podcast game, but Apple has never given a shit about podcasts. So, with so many of the things, so many creative endeavors, discovery is the problem. How is anybody going to find this thing? YouTube has solved that problem for creators because they have 2 billion users and they have done a great job of surfacing content that they believe that you will like. So for anybody that wants to build an audience, I think YouTube is a great way to go about it. You just need to understand kind of how to get hooked into that recommendation engine, and once you do, then it's off to the races. So for me, it took me quite a while to figure out kind of what people wanted to hear about from me and how to get plugged into that, recommendation engine. But once I did, it took off almost overnight.
And I mean, it's funny because you're talking about the kind of the discovery issues. I mean, that's the classic. I've got this band. We're putting out an EP. Who's going to come to this show? Like that's the
Nobody,
crisis that
that's
like
true.
every exactly. Um, a lot of what you do with your show though is you give advice to people trying to do exactly that. So how has it changed? Like how has it changed since you got into the scene to begin with? That you know musicians can actually bring people out to a live experience still. I mean, should that even be the focus?
I wouldn't. I don't answer questions about live events because I haven't really done. I've never promoted a show. I've never played in a serious band. I mean, I played in a couple shitty bands, but nothing serious. So I don't have any firsthand experience with promoting a show, much less a tour or anything. Well, I have promoted some tours, but that's really just with Facebook ads. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm a marketer and business operator first, and I think a lot of what I have to say translates to the music world. But all I'm doing is just giving people basic marketing advice, which I think 90% of that applies to music. Specifically, how do you get people to go to your crappy local band's show? Good question.
Asking so what when I start my next crappy local band, like I'm hoping for an inside tip here. But I mean, what's the biggest kind of I think overlay that you see between kind of like the experience you have as a marketer and music and art and content creation? Like how intertwined are these things and how separate are they?
Well, at the end of the day, I think so. I've done a lot of different stuff in my career. If you look at my resume, it looks like it's all over the place, but I don't think it is because to me, fundamentally, the questions are the same, which is what should we make? Who should we make it for? And why? And then how do we get somebody to give a shit about it? Those are the fundamental questions for anybody that has a product of any kind, and art and music are a product, at least the second that you're asking anybody to give you their money or attention for them. And remember, just because it's free, as in the price is zero, that doesn't mean it's actually free because you're asking people to give you their attention, which in a lot of ways is a more scarce and valuable commodity than their money. Um, so to me, I think that's the first thing people need to do is understand that there is no difference between, art and commerce, at least the second that you're asking people to pay attention to you. The second you do anything more than just hanging up on your wall for your own enjoyment, it's business, and you need to think about it that way. The question I would always ask with any product is, why would anybody give a shit about this? And I mean that, like, I don't mean that like flippantly. I sincerely mean that. And this happened. I mean, this scales up to the biggest corporations in the world. Like, think about, like, for example, I used to work with Procter and Gamble a lot. I remember we were doing something for Crest toothpaste. At the time, Crest had something like 400 different SKUs. A SKU was the stock keeping unit. So when you go to the supermarket and you look at the toothpaste shelf, how many different kinds are there? There's
God.
whitening,
an infinite number.
extra pro health with whitening and re-enamel XJ9000. And you're like, I don't know what any of these are. And so that's the question I would ask Procter & Gamble if they wanted to come out with some new product. Why would anybody give a shit? There's a lot of toothpaste out there already. What's different and interesting about this? And that's the same question that a band or a podcaster or a YouTube channel needs to ask too. Like with podcasts, the big thing everyone wants to do is like, oh, it's going to be me and a couple of my buddies like sitting around and shooting the shit about comics and TV. Why would anybody care about that? Are you and your friend
what the fuck makes your opinions on comic books different?
Maybe maybe you and your friends are exceptionally funny, charismatic people, and no, I mean, really, some people are. Maybe that's it. Maybe someone in your friend group is a stand-up comedian and they're fucking hilarious. Or maybe somebody involved has accomplished something, and it's tough because it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. My friend Andrew Wade, I have to give him credit for this because it's a very insightful way of putting it, is nobody will care about what you've done until you do something that people care about.
No, I mean, that's like absolutely true. And the chicken versus egg thing, like, it's such a pertinent like comment on that, because I think so many people get bogged down when they want to make something, like they want an audience for it, but they don't understand. It's like almost you have to continuously make shit before there is an audience for it. I mean, the caveat to that, like in the modern age, is like something fucking ridiculous, like what happened with me.
Right.
And so now I'm sitting here doing this, talking to you, because society's changed in that way. That happens to a handful of people.
You plugged into a discovery mechanism, which is viral content on social media. And I guess that was, I mean, you tell me, but that was pretty much just blind luck on your part, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think my chances of getting hit by a car again are probably more likely than that happening.
For a second time.
Yeah. Or even the once, that was the thing that blew me away. Like after it happened, I remember I'm down at this art studio here in town, Pop Narcotic, great photographer, Jimmy G. Now he shot for like Rolling Stone and like all these magazines. And some dude from some band comes in, was like waiting while they're taking photos of me. And he starts asking, he's like, well, how do you go viral? I'm like, that's the worst fucking question anyone's asked me in my entire life. But when I was talking to him, I kind of started thinking about, there is kind of, there's almost an answer, which is like, well, you have to show up and do shit.
You got to be in the scoring zone.
Yeah. There's no guarantee that it's going to happen, but like if you're not there, it's not going to happen at all. Like,
yep.
And then you too can have a shitty podcast that nobody wants to listen to.
Yeah, but I think that's an important point, which is like, for whatever it is you're doing, what are the discovery mechanisms that exist that you could plug into, and how do you plug into them? And that's hard to figure out. It's much easier said than done. But like you said, if you try, 100 times, 1 out of 100 times, you get lucky. Maybe that's all you need. Or I shouldn't even say lucky, because like in jiu-jitsu, they say like the more I train, the luckier I get. It's kind of true. And I don't want to make it sound like content creation or marketing is throwing shit at a wall and hoping something sticks, but it kind of is to some extent, in that, there's so many variables you don't control that, as you said, you show up and you hope that one of those times all the stars align and lightning strikes, and maybe you get to be the next guy in the meme, or maybe you don't, but maybe something else happens that is totally unexpected. Like maybe in the course of trying to get famous in a meme, you end up sitting next to somebody at the baseball game that is, some sort of VIP that can unlock some opportunity for you. And the story is, well, I went to this baseball game trying to get famous, but turns out that, I sat next to the CEO of whatever company and we got to talking, and now here I am.
I think that's one of the biggest things too, is like so many people they completely underestimate the like value of just having human conversations with people. And like it just with anyone, people get so sucked into their own shit, and this is like they're looking down like on their fucking phone, and then they're like, well, I'm not getting that promotion, I'm not getting that better job offer, I'm not going viral or whatever the fuck their thing is. But yeah, like they also didn't stop and talk to the guy next to them, who might be the guy that could have offered them that job, or like could just be their best friend. I don't know. Like your life will get better if you open your mouth and talk to that guy. It's kind of always been my impression.
Or he could be a stalker that might ruin your life for the next 3 years. Who knows?
And don't you want that adventure? Like, don't you want to find out?
And that's the beginning of your podcast. I had a stalker. That
sounds like almost too specific for it to have not been a thing that's happened to you.
It's not. It's never happened to me, but I did just go, man, actually, that would be a great podcast because, people love the true crime stuff.
Oh, yeah. Like, I feel like your audience is big enough. You have to have, like, one fan that's obsessive enough to, like, make your life hell. Like, you just need to go find them, right?
It hasn't happened yet. I'm scared of it, to be honest. But a couple, I've gotten recognized in a lot of random places. Like, we live in a suburb of Seattle that's not cool at all. Like, there's no hipsters or anything like that live here. It's like, normal middle-class families and stuff. Nobody cool would ever want to come here, which is why we live here. And I get recognized pretty often, like at Starbucks, or like there's a kid that watches my channel that like lives across the street from us. And then there's another guy that watches my channel that lives like a block up the hill from us. And it's like a very small world out there.
That to me actually like strikes on one of the things I think that's really, really strong about your show. And I think also like on your takes on music and pop culture, you mentioned like a kid and then like an older guy. That
kid is
makes
like
perfect
17.
sense to me.
He's like a junior in high school.
That's definitely a kid. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that to me makes sense in my mind though, for your fan base, like your demographic age range, because like you really kind of cover music over the span of like 4 decades at least, and I think you treat it all with like equal credence. Like, what about you though? Like, when did you get into punk? Like, when did you get into the scene? What was that like? What brought? I don't know. Like, what's your journey?
Well, I saw Suicidal Tendencies on MTV News in, I think, 1989. They had been banned from playing in LA for 5 years because there was too much like gang violence or whatever at their shows. And they were playing their first show in 4 or 5 years or whatever it was, and they covered them on MTV News. And I said, I don't know what that is, but it's fucking cool. And so I went out and I think with like birthday money or something, I bought Lights, Camera, Revolution, and that was kind of the beginning of me getting into all this stuff. And then from there, do you remember Tower Records by any chance?
Yeah.
A lot of people might not, because I don't know how many there were, but anyway, they had a zine buyer there that was really good. And so I kind of plugged into the underground of DIY punk through zines, was sort of my big entry point. I bought one called Maximum Rock and Roll at Tower Records, which is kind of like the, back in the 90s, that was like the gateway to all things, punk, DIY, underground punk at the time. And then I just read that thing cover to cover and started ordering records through the mail and buying zines and then making zines. And here we are 30 years later. Never made it out.
What's the difference between what you're doing now and like zine culture of the 80s and 90s? Like how do you see that as like a straight like lineage or
Mm-hmm. I think it's the same thing. The only difference is scale. And then, obviously there's differences in the medium. But to me, those aren't significant. The way that I make videos is the same as I used to write zine articles back in the day. The only difference is scale, that there's, 2 billion people on YouTube. And, these days I'm fortunate that if I put a video out and it gets 50,000 views in, a week, I'm kind of bummed. I'm like, oh, really? Only 50,000 people? That sucks. Which, I mean, I don't mean to say that flippantly. It's like it scales, as your audience builds, like the goalposts move. So like if Mark Cuban woke up tomorrow with $1 million in the bank, he'd want to blow his brains out. It's all relative. And
I mean, yeah, it's
anyway,
relative to what you do. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be, but that's just the nature of human psychology is we make it relative. We find a way to make it suck. No matter how great it is objectively, we find a way to make it look shitty in relative terms. But anyway, I mean, I probably sold a few thousand zines through the mail when I was a kid. By the time I was, 18 or 19 or whatever, I'd sold, I don't know, maybe 3,000 or something through the mail, which actually in hindsight is a pretty impressive accomplishment to me. I don't know, like, how did I do that?
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. I mean, it's like you make this thing, you put it out in the world, you figure out what are the discovery channels that can help people find out about this thing, and you just keep doing it until people care. So for me, Maximum Rock and Roll was the big one. That was sort of the equivalent of the YouTube recommended videos. They did reviews of like zines and records, and they would review anything that you would send them as long as it, wasn't like hate speech or something like that. And so I would send my zines in there, and they weren't like amazing reviews, but they were at least decent. And whenever that happened, I would get a few hundred orders, and then, you just keep doing that enough times and it builds and builds and builds, just like releasing videos. It's the same thing. And so to me, the big takeaway from all of this is really just all about what are the discovery channels for the thing that you're doing? Because I think that's the biggest struggle for most creators is how do I get anybody to notice and give a shit about the thing that I'm doing? And I think those are two separate things. Getting noticed is hard. For me, I guess I've been fortunate that the stuff I make, I don't think I'm the best at anything I do, but I think I'm at least, maybe a little bit above average at it, but I'm definitely not the best, but good enough that when people notice it, it does okay. And those are two separate things, because you should not assume that just because people notice it, that they'll like it. This is why a lot of people think that buying Facebook or YouTube ads or something is going to be some sort of a shortcut to success. It's not. For example, what is a food that you really dislike?
I can't stand sauerkraut.
Okay. If I spent $1 million on Facebook ads, would it convince you to buy sauerkraut? Probably not, because you're just not into sauerkraut. And that's, I think, the mistake that people make about advertising is they believe that advertising can make you like something. It can't. It can make you aware of something, and it may be able to nudge you a little bit in one direction, but it's not some sort of, magic bullet that's going to make you like something that you didn't like before. So I do think that a lot of creators need to be more willing to adjust what they're doing to, basically there's an overlapping circle of what do I want to make and what does the audience want to consume, and your job as a creator is to find that. And if you're not willing to compromise on making adjustments to your product, well, I don't know what to tell you.
I mean, yeah, that's always kind of the issue, right? I mean, people scream, about selling out, but is it so bad, I guess, is the question, so to make things for other people?
I mean, that's up to you to decide. I mean, if you're cool, Yeah, that's up to everyone to decide. I think of it as like a spectrum. Um, yeah, trying to navigate this window here. A spectrum with like, pure art on one side and pure commerce on the other side. And, everyone has their own spot along that spectrum. Some people and there's trade-offs. Everywhere along that spectrum is a trade-off. Some people make those trade-offs purely in favor of art, that just make their weird shit and hang it on their wall in their bedroom, and they never show it to anybody and don't care at all if they ever get an audience or money off it. Other people are completely on the other end of the spectrum, like the people that make horrible game shows or whatever, or QVC, that print money, but I don't think anybody's making those because they believe it's great art. They're just like, I don't give a shit. If people are watching, then so be it. And it's up to all of us to just decide. And I think it should be a deliberate conversation with yourself about where you believe that you want to be on that spectrum, because it's important that you choose that deliberately, or else you'll probably be unhappy. And if you're not happy making stuff, then what's the point? Because there's certainly a lot of easier paths in life than trying to make content for a living.
No, and I think that's the ultimate side of it, is that there is that motivation that so many people have. I think back in the day it was like, I'm going to be an actor, I'm going to be a musician. Now it's like, I'm going to be on fucking YouTube. But it's this idea like, that's an easy lifestyle. I don't have to work hard at that. I just film the video and it's done. And that is not the case. Like, there's almost any 9-to-5 job is easier than creating content and trying to make a living off of it.
Yeah, very true. And but I should be also clear that this isn't the salt mines. My dad was a corrections officer for 20 years, like literally locked in a cage full of murderers and rapists every day. My father-in-law fought in the fucking jungle in Vietnam for 7 years, before getting thrown in prison by the communists. Let's take a step back and remind ourselves that trying to get attention on the internet is not a real problem. You know what I mean? It's not a real struggle.
No,
but it is.
No, it's definitely not a struggle.
But it is harder than like
it's not effort.
Well, yeah. But people act like it is. It's like, oh, poor me. It's like, all right, fine. I get it's kind of like stressful sometimes, and it's probably not great for mental health in some ways, but I'll fucking take it over, digging ditches any day.
Oh yeah, no, and I mean, you said fucking Vietnam. I mean, like, could you come up with a better example for like this isn't that hard of a lifestyle? And it is such a unique thing that like YouTube has become like the future of DIY culture, because it's like in the back of my head, I'm still thinking of like people like cutting things out, like gluing them together and Xeroxing them. But no, I mean, this is, it should be a labor of love. And I think that it's not hard work if it's a labor of love. It is hard work if you're just looking for validation in a void, which like no one does this without it. Like, that's my whole lifestyle is seeking validation from others. I wouldn't be on the internet. I wouldn't be on stage. Yeah. But if that's all you're after, it's like it's a tough life, period. But yeah, it's not like no one's shooting at you, man.
It could happen.
What's your favorite video? God. I mean, yeah, I guess it does happen. I mean, like, that's when I went.
Happened to Adam 22.
Oh shit. So okay, back to kind of like the content you create specifically, though. Is there like one video that stands out to you that's your favorite you've done? It's like, this is your opus, your masterwork.
I should probably have a good answer for this. The thing is, I think with a lot of creators, that oftentimes the thing that you like the best, whether it's a song or a movie or whatever, is rarely the one that has the most commercial success. And that is true for me too. The one I did earlier this week about Frankie from Amir, I don't know if you watched it, but he basically said that he what was the right word? Rejected all the lyrics he wrote over the past 15 or 20 years because they were coming from a very like negative, dysfunctional place, and that he's not there anymore, and that those lyrics no longer resonate with him. That I really enjoyed that one a lot. There's another one I did called Adulting for Core Kids, which is kind of along the same lines. Like, hey, if you think moving across the country is going to solve your problems, it's not. Probably don't move 3,000 miles away for some girl or guy you've never met before. All the kind of classic mistakes that, hardcore kids, including myself, have made. Probably don't turn drugs into your lifestyle, all that stuff that I'm sure people think that it's corny or that I'm their scene dad lecturing or whatever, but I'm okay with that because somebody's got to tell them.
No, I mean, it's painfully true. I mean, like, you just said way too many things that resonated way too closely. Like, let's be honest. I know, like, my favorite videos of yours. And my favorite videos of yours are ones that I think bring attention, because you have this, I mean, let's start here. You have this like encyclopedic like knowledge of music history, which is just endlessly fascinating to listen to.
Don't remind me. I kick myself all the time for how much of my brain cycles have been consumed with this stupid trivia.
It is. I think there's value in having a few people in the world who like actually have some sense of chronology to this, because there's a narrative that people construct about the evolution of these things, and it's important to a lot of people. I mean, so many people's identities are based on these kind of scenes and these subcultures, but there are parts of it that get kind of left out of the canon, and sometimes you do a really good job of bringing them back in. I think you did a video on like 90s like alternative metal, which I think people forget how deeply connected that was to the rest of the scene because it sounds so different. I loved that video though. And I like you raised, I think, very valid questions like Henry Rollins' Gap commercials. Like, where does that fit into like the narrative of like punk rock cred?
That's for other people to decide. I don't give a shit about the cred part. I just think he looks really funny in those. He looks very, very serious.
Like, he looks more serious in those than he like does screaming on stage, which is kind of saying something because he's not exactly a timid man.
Right. Yeah, he's very focused on being the best motherfucking sleeveless Gap shirt model there ever was.
I got the nicest fucking email from him once, like many years ago. I was like putting this like charity event together, and it was like this shitty, scrappy like DIY thing, but we were trying to get some like big name to come talk at it, and he was like one of like fucking, I don't know, 500 people we emailed, but one of like 3 that took the time to like personally respond to it. And I just remember like being it was like, I was so shell shocked. It was me and my buddy Ryan. We're like reading this thing like 5 times, like, is this legit? And it was like, it's just like so insanely validating, but it was like full of like exactly what you'd expect. Like, it just had like these like kind of anecdotes of like when we were doing DIY shows, and then like at the bottom it was like sent from iPhone or some shit like that.
I figured it'd be a BlackBerry guy.
It might have been. It was like 2014. That's always a thing that's like struck me. I mean, like, having you on this show is vaguely surreal because I was watching your videos for a long time before, we're sitting here having this conversation. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense that there's like a barrier between people that people see on a screen and the rest of humanity. And I think that's a handicap to further opportunity. Like, what advice, I think, do you have for people who are trying to create content or trying to get it in front of people?
Well, I think you made a really good point. And me coming from, the world of DIY punk and hardcore, I think it's an asset that I learned at a fairly young age, that people are a lot more reachable than you think they are. Like, I started interviewing bands when I was 14 or 15. The first band I ever interviewed was like my favorite band at the time, this band called Capitalist Casualties from the Bay Area. That's like kind of a, crusty, fast hardcore kind of band. and I still like him. I was, a kid, an actual child, and they had like an address on their 7-inch that I bought, and I don't know how I came to understand that you could just write people letters and ask them to do an interview, but maybe I read it in Maximum Rock and Roll or something. I don't know. But I did. I just wrote a letter that said, whatever. I have a zine. I don't know if I mentioned my age or not. I don't think I did. But anyway, I just wrote him a letter and said, hey, I have a zine. Would you like to do an interview? And then, I don't know, 2 weeks later or something, I got a letter back from the guitarist. It was like, yeah, sounds good. Here's my number. Give me a call. And I was like, oh my God. And I was very nervous at the time, but I was like, wow, the guy in my favorite band, like, I'm talking to him on the phone. And I think that was a really powerful lesson to understand that you could just do that. And I think you're right that people have the idea that the people they see on screen or on stage or whatever are, different from them. And if you come from punk and hardcore, then I think to the extent that that notion can be shattered, I think they do a pretty good job of that in our world, because the guy or girl in the band that was playing 10 minutes ago might be standing next to you in the crowd after their set, which would never happen at a pop show. Ariana Grande is not going to come hang out in the crowd afterwards. Not that she wouldn't necessarily, but she just can't. But that's another conversation.
It's like a safety concern.
Yeah, and I do think this is tangential, but I think it's important to mention is another thing I've learned though, and I try to put across in my videos, is that the people in our world are not better than the people than normies. In fact, my wife didn't know anybody in bands before she met me. And we've met a lot of people in the bands that she likes just from whatever. And I remember years ago, she said to me, you're right. People in bands aren't any different or aren't any better than normal people. Pause. Actually, they're a little bit worse. And I was like, you're right. And so I think it's an important point is that there are lots of great things about punk and hardcore culture and people and all that stuff. But I think it's also dangerous for people to think that, to get some sort of sense of superiority and to think that, Ariana Grande or whoever, fill in the blank, famous quote unquote normal person is different or worse, or like to make assumptions about who that person is, just the same way as like we probably all got mad at some point when we were younger because somebody made assumptions about us because of our t-shirt or whatever superficial thing. You're doing the same thing when you assume that Ariana Grande is a stuck-up bitch or whatever, term you want to use about her just because she makes music for people of a different clique. So I think that's a really dangerous thing that I try to get across. And first, it's interesting how that sort of thing makes people angry to say, like, I don't know, this pop singer, she seems like a pretty cool person to me. That sort of thing makes people very angry, and I'm disappointed by that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a very controversial opinion that you take that should not be controversial. Like
Right.
anyone making cool shit they like should not be a bad thing. But there is and has been for like decades this very internalized like idea of like, well, especially on like punk and hardcore, of like fuck them. That song doesn't even have breakdowns in it. You know, like. Oh,
I also it's very funny to me, like so one of my favorite artists, I don't know if you're familiar with her, is Charlie XCX. So she always wears impaled Nazarene shirts, and it's funny to me that people think she couldn't possibly like them. It's like, well, she's A, weird as shit, and B, a professional musician. What makes you think that she couldn't, like, if you know about this band, why wouldn't she? She knows more about music than you do. I know that that's something you don't want to hear, but it's true.
Yeah, no, that's like every like little like subculture scene like has those opinions. I mean, like I think it's like the classic like you're a fake nerd girl.
Right.
Like yes, there's so many like hot women out there that are
So
so
desperate.
desperate to meet you, yeah, that they're gonna pretend to collect Spider-Man for 15 years of their life just for this one moment where they get to meet you. You know, like
I'll get that
give me a
sweaty
break,
guy at
man.
the Emerald City Comic Con to swoon. Finally, my life has meaning.
God, it is just like yeah, that girl spent like 2 weeks making that costume by hand because she's not a fan. Like, go
Right.
fuck yourself,
She
dude.
really wants
Like,
to impress you. So desperate for your validation. Uh, yeah, and I
that
guess
was like,
that's
I was gonna say like, that always reminded me of like the dudes at shows who like would like ask like the girl they met there to like hold their fucking backpack or jacket so they could dance. Like, get the fuck over yourself. She could probably kick you in the face.
well, that's something I need to make a video about one of these days, and I'm nervous too because I know it'll be a shit show, but it just kind of has to be said. Is I think it's very interesting that in a scene that prides itself on being so accepting that they really don't respect the opinions of women in general, especially young women. Like any band that has a lot of teenage girls that like it must be garbage. But if teenage boys like it, nobody has any problem with that. Uh, and For some reason, this is a thing that nobody really pokes at, and I'm not sure why.
It's definitely it's a discussion that like needs to happen. I mean, it's a like where's good clean fun to do like song for the ladies like part two. um what so okay so this is actually good because that's something I want to ask you about. Like these are like things that like these are videos you make that like you're gonna get blowback for, but like what's your most controversial like music opinion or just opinion period, I guess.
Well, I'm not going to share my most controversial opinions here. uh, Musical opinion. I mean, it doesn't matter what I like or don't like. I mean, that's who cares. I mean, my videos are not really about the music that I like to consume. You know what I mean? Uh, that's beside the point. Who cares what I like? Like whatever you like. It doesn't matter. Um, and so that's why I try to kind of keep it objective. But in general, I don't like my tastes are pretty much the opposite of what anybody with quote unquote good taste likes. I don't choose that to be contrarian. Like I don't like Fugazi. I don't like Bad Brains. I don't like Dead Kennedys. I don't like Refused. I don't like any of that stuff. I'm not into it. I like Amir and Ariana Grande and Blink 182. That's what I like. And I don't choose that to be contrarian. It's just what I like.
Well, and there's something like that. There is something like vaguely radical and just being like, this is good. Like I like this. I find it good, and like this is why I appreciate it.
And I would
And I
never
like I appreciate that actually about your videos because I know like you say you don't necessarily do that, but like your analysis I think does still come from a place of like understanding how these like musical cultures interact and from like a fandom. And like there's something I've heard you say a couple times in your videos that like I've seen like in the comments people comment on, which is like that there's like exciting stuff going on in hip hop and like these like kind of like bedroom SoundCloud rappers are like doing really cool shit, which I agree with like full heartedly. And but watching like the debate comments is phenomenal because I think there's a lot. You're literally introducing people and specifically like older white dudes probably to those artists.
Well, I hope so. Because, if there's any one thing that I would like to communicate with my videos, it is to be open-minded enough to not necessarily like any particular thing, but to understand it and understand if there's millions or hundreds of thousands of people out there in the world who really passionately love this thing, maybe take a minute to understand why, because that can only make your life better. If you understand why people are into this thing, that doesn't mean you have to like it. But it can only make your life better if you understand it for lots of reasons. Like, especially if you want to be a creator of any kind, you should understand why people like stuff. I mean, I won't say any bands because I don't want to put them down, but there's some bands I'm just like, it took me so long and I still don't understand why people like some of these bands, especially a lot of these like kind of nerdy, like progressive mathcore type bands. I still don't quite understand why. I legitimately don't understand why people like it, because they don't have songs. There's nobody in the band that's super charismatic. I don't really get it. But then I think, when I was 21, I thought it was cool to write these kind of just nonsensical songs with a lot of notes in them. Just because maybe that's a thing that kind of young men who are too smart for their own good are into at a certain point in their life. Maybe, I don't know, but like, that's what I'm still trying to understand. And instead of making a video saying fill in the blank mathcore band is boring and shitty, I would rather take the time to interact with the audience and say, I don't understand this stuff. Can you help me?
Well, I think that's the success of your channel, and yeah, I mean, there's a billion people reviewing music and giving their personal hot takes on it. You're analyzing like the culture and like the marketing behind it, which is really unique to you, and I think it's been really valuable to music fans as well as musicians. And like, honestly, I thank you for that, because it's been something very refreshing that there wasn't a ton of available before that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, that's what I like to do, is just, again, it's not really about putting my own opinion about whether I like or don't like this thing out there, because who gives a fuck. But what I would like to do is, help people be better critical thinkers, I guess, which might seem arrogant or lofty or something. Maybe it is. I don't know. But that's what I would like to do, is help people become better critical thinkers. And I would like to talk about things that are music adjacent in the near future. Like I did that MTV video. I'll do one about Hot Topic for sure. And maybe like Alternative Press or Rolling Stone or whatever other like music adjacent things. Because I think, there's a lot to be learned there. And I don't think the audience will have any problem with that. Man, some people will, because, some people have a problem with anything that's not praising their favorite band, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you're always going to find someone. You'll always find someone, but I think that's incredibly exciting stuff, and I think those are huge parts of the culture that you're dissecting and helping people understand. So aside from like more videos and like kind of branching out in different topics, like what are other things that do you have like ideas of what you want to continue to see, like the Punk Rock MBA as a brand grow into, or a continuing future path for yourself as a personality?
Well, I have to find a way to engage with current events or music adjacent topics, or I'll run out of shit to talk about. It can't be a backwards looking channel, at its core, because I'll just run out of shit, or I'll have to start talking about really obscure shit nobody cares about. So I have to do that. The podcast I'm very excited about, because the podcast is really about, I talk to people who have found a way to make a living doing what they love, whether that's music or, like next week I have one coming out with my favorite YouTuber, a girl named Psych IRL, who I absolutely love, and my channel is a shameless ripoff of hers. But so that's what the podcast is all about, and I'd like to kind of get into some of that stuff on the YouTube channel as well. I don't think the audience would have any problem, like if I made a video explaining, why Anthony Fantano is successful. I don't think anyone would have a problem with that. And then if I do one about Anthony Fantano, then I could do one about another YouTuber. And, that opens up a whole, I think about any of these things that I do, like the MTV one was a test of, if I talk about music adjacent TV, how will people respond? And it got a good reception. So I go, okay, well, that tells me I have permission to talk about all the other subtopics in there. Could I do a show about Jackass, a video about Jackass? Definitely. I don't think that would be a problem. And if I can do a show about Jackass, well, then I'm only one step from doing a show about the real world. And if I do a show about the real world, then I could probably do one about Friends one of these days.
It almost grows into like a larger kind of pop culture brand at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think
am I understanding it correctly?
Yeah, I think like pop culture and business, and again, I could talk about Hot Topic or PacSun or Zoomies or fill in the blank other, youth culture retailer, and I think that would be, I think that would work just fine. Again, it's really just about like, I think an audience, once they understand what your point of view is, if they're interested in your point of view, then I think you can apply that, you can point that lens at a lot of different things and they'll be okay with it.
Can you do one for me personally that's just about the rise, fall, and rise again of Airwalk sneakers? Because I would
Tell me,
watch the shit out of that.
I would love. That's exactly the kind of thing I would love to do. Actually, I mean, I care. Like, to be honest, I'm way more passionate about business than I am music. Like, I don't really care that much about music at this point in my life. Uh, I'm far more interested in business. So, tell me about Airwalk. What is the rise again part?
Well, it's like they're doing. I mean, for like 2 years now, they've been relaunching and marketing and like aggressively, and it's been interesting to see. Like they've been kind of trying to collaborate with like streetwear brands and like different designers, and like they're relaunching all their classic shoes, but with like different colorways and variants and like slightly different things to like try to, I don't know, simultaneously capture like a very like youth centric market and also like dudes my age who are very nostalgic. That was my first skate sneaker. I ripped one of those. But it's fascinating to me. Like,
so what is their reception among like younger people?
I don't know that I've seen young people actually wear them outside of like the like barrage of like digital content they put out. But I will say that like I bought a pair and like I've posted them a few times, and I have had younger people then in turn just be like, "Well, what the hell are these? These are super cool." So like, there is like something out there. It's just I'm so curious to see like how the marketing, like what the expectation from a marketing perspective versus the reality of it is. Because the flip side of that is like also like wearing them around town. It's like a bunch of dudes in their 30s who are just like, "Oh my god, are those Airwalk ones? Do they still make those?" Like, do you remember before Jason Lee was a Scientologist?
God, I forgot he was a Scientologist. I think Fila is such an interesting example of this. Is, 5 years ago, Fila was like, my father-in-law at Costco, shoe of choice. And then the guy who resurrected Fila, I guess, is like some like 70-year-old Korean guy, who I forget what he had done before, but he knows how to fucking resurrect a brand, and he did it. And now there's cool, like, LA hipster kids wearing Fila. Fila's hot as fuck. And will it last? I don't know. But like the fact that they even resurrected it at all is amazing. And so that tells me that there's certainly potential to do that with Airwalk. I mean, if you can bring fucking Fila back from the dead, then Airwalk certainly has all the heritage in the world to work with. So that is exactly the content I would like to talk about, actually.
I'm gonna be so pissed if you don't make this video now.
I will. I promise you that it will go on my list of things that I want to do.
Which I'm sure is like 2 miles long if you laid out the full list, though, because there is a lot of cool shit to dissect and talk about and analyze.
It is, but how do you connect the dots between, my audience now, which just fucking punishes me about Deftones and Dance Gavin Dance? How do you connect the dots between that and Airwalk? That's the challenge. But that's a business challenge to me. Is like, with any other brand, how do you keep the brand relevant to the current audience while also moving it where it needs to go to stay relevant at some future point? So to me, that's like a brand management, product management challenge, which is what I have always done for a living. I mean, I don't do YouTube full time, and I don't really ever want to. Fundamentally, I'm a marketer and a business operator, and it just so happens that managing this product and business is something that became more successful than I thought it would. But I'm just applying the same kind of thinking that I would when I used to work on Febreze and Swiffer that I do to YouTube.
One last question before we end here. What's the biggest thing you ever hoped to accomplish with the channel? And what was your North Star to begin with?
I mean, I greatly exceeded that a long time ago. I remember I would have been, really happy to have 10,000 subscribers or to like regularly get like 8 or 10,000 views on videos, I'd be like, I'm cool with that. That's all good. So to now get easily 50,000 views on a bad video is amazing to me. So I've already greatly exceeded that, and I'm incredibly grateful that anybody gives a shit what I have to say about anything at all. And you know, as I don't know if cynical is the right word, but you know, maybe sometimes I do sound cynical about it, and I am to some extent, I suppose, in some ways. But more than anything else, I'm incredibly grateful that anybody gives a fuck that I have this opportunity, and I treasure it, and I want to make sure that I don't fuck it up. So that's currently my North Star, is how do I keep this train running? Because this has opened a lot of opportunities for me that are, it's like nothing else done. You know, I think I've done a lot of shit in my life, but nothing has opened up as many opportunities for me as YouTube has. So I'm just grateful for it, and I want to keep the fucking train running on the rails.
It's awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for hopping on here and doing this with me, because the truth is my North Star with this was just to have cool conversations with cool people, and this was definitely both of those things.
Well, maybe on your next show you'll be able to do that.
Fuck off. Thank you so much for coming on.
Cool.
We'll see you next time.
We'll see you then.